I think photography for me personally captures a moment where it cannot be repeated in history. So I guess the whole Help Local F&B initiative is a fulfilling journey for me throughout the whole 2 months because one is that I get to learn something that I'm not really good at, which is the food photography component, and two is that I get to educate the traditional hawkers who have never had the experience of food photography. Hi, I'm Gerald. I'm a self-taught photographer. I've been doing photography for about 5 years now. I started off as a photographer back in the days when I started having interest in architecture and travel. Being born and raised here in Singapore, this is where I can practice my photography. So Singapore in many ways influenced my photography in the early stages because this is where I kind of get to learn what are like architectural, interior, and what are symmetry. You can find all these elements everywhere in Singapore. When COVID hit and when circuit breaker hits, just like many businesses out there, as an individual, my income was affected as well. So personally, it affected me in a way whereby I can barely do any shoots and I have to figure a way of how I can offer a service where I can do it in my own home. I was just at home thinking like, what can I do? So that's where actually I started out with the whole Help Local F&B initiative. I can sustain myself at least for the next 1 or 2 months. So why not I offer my services to these people who actually are the most badly impacted because of circuit breaker. Why I decided to help the hawkers is actually the older hawkers, the more traditional hawkers, they do not know how to transit properly. And that's where I realized that like these are the guys who actually needs the help. I personally feel that they are probably the most affected and it's the hardest to transit into the whole online social media stuff. When the initiative was first launched on Facebook, I didn't have in mind how many people would actually pick it up. So a safe number, I would say that I received about 150 requests. That's how I started off with all these like pro bono services to help them to increase their online traffic. Well, I guess like everyone is equally impacted during this season, right? So there were Japanese food, there were Chinese food, Muslim food, and even Peranakan food. I helped a total of 41 local F&B businesses over the period of about 2 months. Personally, I do not have a lot of background in food photography. So this is where I guess why the initiative was like birth, right? So for me to be able to practice and hone a skill that I have not really touched on in the past few years. Through all this initiative, I learned that by adding ingredients on the side of the photo, it increases the aesthetic. By adding some chili padi or some reds into the food, it looks a lot more appetizing as compared to a dull-looking food. I guess after the whole initiative, after trying so many different kind of food and cuisines, one of the food that actually stands out for me is the thunderbolt tea rice. I've never tried thunder tea rice because the idea of like putting tea with rice just doesn't go well. But after the shoot, I was like, oh, it's actually very tasty. F&B business like the akefish soup or even the thunderbolt tea rice, they actually came forward and thanked me and said that like, hey, what you're doing actually works. This is why I did what I did, and I'm glad that like through 1 or 2 examples, I hope that it's the same for the rest of the 39 of them. So the one message that I want to tell the creatives in Singapore is that in normal times, the hawkers, the F&B industry has always been there to support you in times of need, and when pandemic hits, when they need the help the most, I don't think as a creative we should hold back in helping them.